In Norfolk Southern's latest attempt to make it right, as CEO Alan Shaw has said oh so many times at this point in regards to the East Palestine disaster that happened back in February, that started with the derailment of a Norfolk Southern train, followed by the subsequent detonations of a handful of cars filled with toxic chemicals that cause cancer in a small town of people. That went on, and now Norfolk Southern is trying to push the blame onto other folks, announcing yesterday on the 4th of July, maybe thinking no one was going to hear about this because everyone would be out on their holiday, essentially trying to pass the blame on to the manufacturers of the chemicals as well as the owners of the actual rail cars. Let's get into the article here. Norfolk Southern sues chemical railcar firms over East Palestine derailment. Norfolk Southern is suing chemical manufacturers and a group of railcar leasing firms over the East Palestine, Ohio derailment and toxic chemical release, saying those companies must share in the cleanup costs from the February 3rd incident. Reuters reports the railroad contends the companies are liable for a share of the costs under the Federal Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, also known as the Superfund Law. Among the companies being sued are Vinyls, manufacturers of the vinyl chloride that was vented and burned at East Palestine, a decision that remains a key point of contention. Others listed as defendants are GATX Corp. And a subsidiary, General American Marks Co., Trinity Industries Leasing Co., SMBC Rail Services, another car leasing firm, Union Tank Car Co., and Dow Chemical Co. Norfolk Southern's filing on Friday with the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Ohio says that the suit, quote, does not change the railroad's commitment to making things right in East Palestine, but, quote, rather seeks to ensure that others responsible for the safe transport of their rail cars and their chemicals contribute to the effort. The suit contends a bearing failure that caused the derailment was owned by General American Marks Co. and that the chemicals were released from cars owned or operated by other defendants. Now, to me, none of this should be taken all that seriously. It really seems like Norfolk Southern might be a little peeved that Vinyls, the owner of the vinyl chloride, the people who actually manufactured the vinyl chloride, actually in the NTSB hearing that went on about 2 weeks ago, came out and plainly said that they did not think that their vinyl chloride in those cars was at any risk of polymerization, therefore meaning that there was no imminent risk of explosion from those cars at all, which would lead to, the necessary decision to explode these in the small town in a controlled, which we now know is not controlled, vent and burn. But let's actually get into that clip from that NTSB hearing, from a tweet that we put out. Breaking in bombshell East Palestine testimony, the owner of 5 toxic vinyl chloride cars Norfolk Southern detonated over East Palestine said they told Norfolk Southern 3 different times they saw no evidence of VC inside the cars, were polymerizing, and at risk of an uncontrolled explosion.
On Saturday morning, February 4th, Vinyls was notified of the train derailment that involved tank cars carrying our VCM product. Following the notification, Vinyls activated its Special Situations team in Dallas. We sent a technical team to East Palestine, and we communicated with Norfolk Southern and its contractors regarding the properties of stabilized VCM. To my knowledge, no other shippers responded with this level of support. On Saturday evening, February 4th, representatives of Vinyl spoke directly with representatives of Norfolk Southern and its emergency response contractors regarding conditions at the derailment site. We made it clear, based on our expertise of the chemical properties of our product, that stabilized VCM would be unlikely to spontaneously polymerize under the conditions described to us by Norfolk Southern and its contractors. Polymerization of VCM is a very exothermic reaction, which generates significant heat, resulting in increased pressure within its container. If that pressure is not relieved, it can cause a failure of the container. An uncontrolled VCM polymerization reaction would have an obvious temperature rise that would continue through the duration of the exothermic reaction. For this reason, we emphasize with Norfolk Southern and its contractors the importance of monitoring the temperature of the rail cars. And on Sunday morning, February 5th, we further reinforced our view that polymerization was not occurring during a call with Norfolk Southern representatives.
And after that, the gentleman from Vinyls goes on to reiterate that they said this an additional time, a third time, telling Norfolk Southern, hey, we don't think that these cars are at risk of imminent explosion. Unfortunately, that information only went from Vinyls to Norfolk Southern, and Norfolk Southern seemingly neglected to share that information with the rest of Unified Command, who ultimately needed to make that decision for the detonation that occurred on February 6th, just 3 days after the derailment on the night of the 3rd. Seems like a major red flag, and if you're thinking that, you are correct, because not giving all the information to the people who need to make the decision to set a bunch of carcinogens on fire in a small town seems to be a major issue. But in addition to Vinyls, the other companies that are being dragged into this lawsuit by Norfolk Southern include a few of the companies who actually own some of the other rail cars on the train. I've got a couple issues with this as well, considering before the train leaves the station, in any instance, the railroad company needs to inspect those cars. Unfortunately, Norfolk Southern and other railroads have been fighting tooth and nail to shorten that inspection time. This was actually an issue that was brought up back in December during the Railroad Workers United attempted strike that was squashed by the Biden administration back then. Union Joe really coming through for those guys there. The unions were really trying to push for additional safety features, including more time to do the train inspections, including additional safety features and time off, which is what we heard more about back in December during that time frame. If those inspection times are longer, maybe the issues with those train cars would have been discovered. In addition to that, they're blaming one of the cars that actually caused the derailment that had the heating up bearing issue. They're saying, hey, we didn't own that car. That was owned by somebody else. Therefore, the derailment, part of it should be on them. The major issue with that is, if you remember, there were multiple hot bearing detectors along the tracks that signaled, hey, this is heated up more than it should be on multiple occasions before reaching East Palestine. And what did Norfolk Southern do? They sure didn't stop the train when that alarm went off. They said, hey, let's keep going. And then a second alarm goes off, and they're like, we can probably make it. Let's keep going. And then the train derails. Now, if it was like, hey, we didn't have any of that information, I'd say, okay, maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room here. But Norfolk Southern had notifications, essentially, saying, hey, something's not right with this car. And then again, hey, something's still not right with this car. And they continued to keep going, which then led to the derailment. So a little bit of a weak argument there for me, at least, on a couple of those things. But Norfolk Southern is dealing with all sorts of legal issues, and they're not only trying to bring in and cast blame onto some of these other companies when clearly they are at fault here, but they're also trying to throw out lawsuits that residents are trying to put together against Norfolk Southern. Again, Norfolk Southern really trying to make it right by throwing lawsuits out from residents who have been severely impacted health-wise. They've had to move. Many of them are dealing with health symptoms, bad health symptoms, children with health symptoms, and Norfolk Southern trying to throw out those lawsuits. Let's go ahead and pull up this article. This one is not brand new, but it certainly, to me, does not look like this is Norfolk Southern trying to make it right. Once again, as Alan Shaw, CEO, says all the time. This one from Reuters. Norfolk Southern says East Palestine residents' suit is barred by U.S. law. Norfolk Southern Corp has asked a U.S. judge to toss a proposed class action lawsuit it is facing over a February train derailment that led to a toxic chemical spill in East Palestine, Ohio, arguing the claims are threadbare and barred by federal law. The railroad told a federal court in Youngstown, Ohio, that the consolidated complaint filed last month on behalf of roughly 500,000 area residents, businesses, and property owners relies on, quote, vague and conclusory allegations that it acted improperly, leading to the crash. I outlined a couple things that they probably did out improperly right there. We're going to hopefully get more of that. The company said it is required as a common carrier under U.S. law to transport hazardous materials like those that spilled and caught fire, including vinyl chloride. It said the plaintiff's negligence, nuisance, and strict liability claims are preempted by federal laws like the Hazardous Materials Transportation Act and the Federal Railroad Safety Act. Those laws, quote, expansively regulate railroad operations and bar these sorts of claims based in state law, Norfolk said. Jane Conroy, an attorney representing the plaintiffs with the law firm Simmons Hanley Conroy, on Monday called the motion to dismiss routine and said, quote, we have every expectation that the motion will be denied in its entirety. There it is, just another major glaring issue with this story in East Palestine, the story that keeps on giving, unfortunately. Every time it seems like there's a little bit of hope coming out, just like yesterday's news that we covered with the Governor DeWine, reaching out asking for a disaster declaration. That doesn't even seem to be as good as it sounds. You can go and watch that video for the details there. I just really hope that these folks in East Palestine can be made whole in one way or another, but as the time continues to tick, it becomes less and less likely. For more updates on this story, as well as everything else that we've been covering here at Status Coup, please consider subscribing. Thank you all for watching so much, and have a great day.